that we have almost over 60% of our commercial activities in the informal sector. And those are not registered for taxation efficiently.
But you know, we've been saying that for over 20 years or more. This informal sector, we need to bring them on board. We need to solve, you know, and it's even more than 20 years. And we're still struggling to correct that.
That requires work.
Yes.
To tax the informal sector, that requires work. And we don't want to do the heavy lifting. That's the truth of the matter. And you know what we have been doing. We are okay as tax collecting officials to sit in our offices under air conditioning, right? And then allow the law to bring the tax revenue to us. So what we have done over the years is to rely on the law. So, and that is why we have relied extensively on indirect tax handles. That doesn't involve a lot of work. So if you pick VAT, the law empowers charging agents to withhold and do what? Remit. If you pick corporate taxes, so we have a lot of indirect tax handles which are based on consumption. Okay, that doesn't really require a lot of hard work. If you go and buy fuel and you look at the taxes in the price build-up and all of that. But the informal sector, where are they located? They are located out there. You have to roll your sleeves.
And get there.
You have to understand their business model. You have to understand their operations and all of that. And you don't only go to the informal sector simply because you want to go and collect taxes. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to have a package that also support their business model and all of that. So we don't want to do that. We leave them on their own. Okay, and therefore, where do we catch them? We then want to deploy tax handles that get them at consumption points. So you go and buy fuel, whether you are in the formal economy or informal economy, you are then paying. And that is where the problem is. So those, the privileged or the less privileged few, let me call them that way, who are in the formal sector and are paying the direct tax handles, are equally burdened with the indirect taxes, because they don't have an escape route and the rest. And that's why we are saying that we are deepening the taxes and burdening the faithful few, right? And also, what do we do to move away from that? Look, and for me, I don't see it as rocket science, right? It can be done. Fraud. If we deploy a lot of digitization in the tax administration and compliance, and we eliminate human interface, right, between tax officials and then the tax-paying population, will actually close the gap significantly. Studies have been done that shows that Ghana loses as much as we collect. So when we talk about the leakages in the revenue envelope, it's not like these leakages lead to the sea or something, collusion and all of that. Then when you pick even property tax and all of that, other countries have done quite well in terms of property tax, but we haven't done quite well, because at the end of the day, who are those owning those properties?
So I mean, I think just to continue from where my colleague actually indicated. If you take a step and look at the history of the Ghana Revenue Authority in terms of tax administration, one of the things which was done, if you look at the past years, was actually to look at how identification. And one of the good things that came up was the use of the Ghana card as our tax ID. The whole idea was that if you look at what other jurisdictions have done, you use your tax ID as linkage to your properties. When you are buying a car, you're buying a house, you bank accounts and all those things. To the point that a revenue officer can sit in their office, and if they get your phone number, or they will just punch it in, they will know how many taxes you are paying for your income, for your property, and everything. I used to work in a jurisdiction where I was a tax officer, and this is what was done. This was years ago, or more than 10 years ago. All that you needed to do was just get somebody's name, just key it in, and you know everything about the person. If you look at it, that's actually supposed to address some of the key limitations in the informal sector. Because if you are operating a business and you are not registered to pay VAT and taxes, income taxes, but you have a bank account and then you see the amount of revenues going through
that account,
that is a way to profile you. The interesting thing is that this will not be done, cannot be done in a day. This is a process that those who we are copying from have been doing it for about 50, 100 years. Yes. So we as a country, we should have appreciation of the patience to understand that this is where we are going. The idea that if we are able to continue with that, it will be in a position where some of those informal sectors will be find difficult to operate because you can't open a bank account with national ID number. I mean, wherever now, even you are depositing, where's your Ghana card? Yeah, a time will come that we have all the information about you, and that is another way to go. So I think the interesting thing is that sometimes we find ourselves in a situation, and then we won't solve it because the question is that do you have to wait? Because, for instance, if you look at when we went to the IMF program and all the tax lessons that were promoted, you would tend to see that some of them may have a negative impact on businesses and individuals. The question is that, how do you balance the two? So these are some of the discussions that we'll have. But I think as we are going through, some of these things will come up and we can discuss this better.
Yeah. Okay. With most of your openings around the taxes, I believe we can start looking at the tax issue proper, and then we'll move to other areas. Now, Prof, which taxes do you want gone? Which ones do you want stay? And which one do you want brought in?
Okay, so let me start with the ones I don't want to see. And I can't wait to say goodbye to them. E-levy, electronic transaction levy, has to go. Before e-levy was introduced, we had done some work, and our projection was that in the next couple, or let's say in 5 years' time, we're only going to see a checkbook in a textbook. Okay, so as more and more people embrace digital services in the payment and the rest of them, they will rely less on checkbook. Yeah. Okay, but then e-levy was introduced, and actually there was an uptick in demand for checks and the rest of it, as a way of offsetting that burden. So once you do that, that is also cost. Right, that's cost to taxpayers, to consumers, and the rest of them. Then you're also looking at the growth trajectory and the projection for the digital economy. So if you put all these things together, clearly, you don't need a prophet to tell you that this is not a tax handle to introduce. But then, of course, you want to say, okay, we needed the revenue. How much have we gotten from e-levy?
E-levy so far, since
2024, we are looking at just something above 2 billion Ghana cedis. 2024, right? But that is not the only thing. When you look at the revenue you are getting from there, you're also looking at the compliance cost to taxpayers. And let me tell you what has happened right after COVID. Virtually every 6 months, businesses, households have to change their system to be tax compliant. Either tax stamp, manufacturing have to change. So, and then look at the compliance cost. Within the banking sector, financial sector, they paid millions of dollars to reconfigure their system to be compliant and all of that. So why do you take businesses through all of that? So in fact, since COVID came, virtually the unpredictability in our tax environment is of scarce investors. You don't do that. So e-levy has to go. That is the way we see it. Then I can even match it immediately. Okay, let me assume without admitting. How did we spend the e-levy inflows? If you check the 2023 Appropriation Act, the budgetary allocation to the Office of the President, which they call government machinery, took almost all the money we're getting from e-levy. That's not an efficient way. No. Okay, so when we say we can remove these taxes and we can close the gap from expenditure rationalization, it is possible. And we can demonstrate that, right? I am not expecting this current president, right, to have the staff strength that the previous government had at Jubilee House. No, that's not efficient. In fact, that doesn't add to productivity. That is waste. And that's what we call wasteful spending. So if the president, and he has already indicated that, if you look at the 68 independence celebration, the cost-cutting measures, if you look at the number of ministers he has now, of course, 60 or maybe 50. So we are looking at 4 more and all of that. So let's work with 60. I mean, compared to the previous benchmark, okay, we can say he's done very well, even though 60 is still quite a higher number. But given the poor records we are talking about,
the comparative threshold is
sometimes
looking
you,
good,
you are good because your opponent is particularly bad,
that's right.
Or the standard is just that bad. So it makes it look like you've done so well because Benin is governing with 24, Ivory Coast is 31, and that's a trend now, right? So how do we achieve more with less? Because without expenditure control and efficiency, you can tax as much as you want to tax, you will not get the development. And let me tell you what is happening here. If you compare, of course, we can compare Ghana to Malaysia because we all just celebrated our 68th independence, right? So let's say these two countries are on retirement and they should be enjoying their lives, right? So, all right, in 1957, Ghana's GDP was slightly higher than Malaysia. Today, the gap is 80 times, even if you look at it in GDP per capita terms. All right. But the question is, did Malaysia, Singapore, and South Korea develop out of higher revenue relative to the size of the economy? The answer is no. Even though our tax to GDP ratio trails some of these countries and is even below the sub-Saharan African average, the low tax to GDP ratio has never constrained Ghanaian government from spending the way they want to spend. So if you see low tax to GDP ratio, then you look at expenditure to GDP ratio, you can see that it hasn't constrained us. And the reason is that the difference can easily be done through borrowing. So we have spent relative to the size of our economy, like many of these other countries. So Ghana spent relative to the size of its economy, like Malaysia, like Singapore. These countries got growth, these countries got development, and we picked inflation, we picked poverty, we picked inequality. You know the difference is corruption, inefficiency. So if you look at value proposition in economics, we are spending more in terms of resources, and we are generating less. That is where the difference is.
Okay. So you want e-levy gone,
and then COVID-19 also must go. Of course, there's nothing to abolish from the emission tax because we have not collected anything. In fact, actually, the charging agent, DVLA, has not been properly configured. We also don't have the equipment to measure the emission, right, to be able to do. So the act is gathering dust. So there's nothing to abolish from there. Let's move on. So, but there's a possibility
that it will come.
No, there's a possibility VAT on financial services
will go up.
No, may be reintroduced. I'm just making an academic guess. Okay, if you look at the VAT continuum, right, it may appear there is a vacuum from that perspective. So if you look at manufacturing, it's based on value addition. So the value addition from there is captured under VAT, but then when it comes here, and the reason I'm saying so is this. Under the 16th IMF supported program, which kicked in from April 3rd, 2015, with the extension to April 2019, right? So the previous government, now the NDC, had introduced a number of taxes as part of that particular program, and one of the instruments they used was VAT on financial services,
which faced some huge, resistance.
Yes, but they got it passed. So it was the MPP administration that actually removed those taxes. Okay, and it's amazing how in 2025 we are talking about tax removal. In fact, actually in 2017, the MPP administration removed many more taxes and adjusted rates of existing taxes, much more than we are considering here.
And you see, the issue of the removal of taxes, not to take you away from where you are in terms of what you want, what you are likely to see back. We see governments, especially when they're coming in fresh, based on promises they've made, based on, I don't know whether they don't know the reality on the ground, but come and remove everything, and then the next dispensation, they go, somebody said they become wicked. Is that the same thing we're going to see with this government in terms of this first budget?
So I think it's quite interesting. I think it's quite interesting that you made a point that when government comes in, they remove all taxes, and then they now everybody, they become the wicked people. The question is that why? I think there is a fundamental point that sometimes we miss in conversations. And that's the hardcore, cold truth. Because I don't think anybody will come in and then just tax for no reason. One of the things, and I think earlier in the earlier submission, we talk about the informal sector, where it's almost over 60% of the Ghana's economy. And then the question is that what is the impact of the informal sector in all the discussion? The informal sector is those who operate more or less like in the dark. When the policeman, when their house has been robbed, they call the policeman. When they are driving on their roads and their portals, they call the government. When their lights are off, they call the government. How does all these things get funded? These are the hard, cold truths. And I think the earlier as we are looking at all these things, in terms of removal of taxes, in terms of introducing taxes, whatever we are looking at, that is some of the conversation that needs to be looked at. In fact, when we look at some of the respondents' key expectations, all these things, which are very positive, the question then becomes, how would they be funded? And I think that goes back to the fundamental principle. I mean, if you look at from where KPMG, where we sit, every day as we deal with tax advisors, we deal with taxpayers, administration. One of the key things I know you mentioned about, that is, we talk about tax administration, the digital economy. There should be more emphasis on investment in that area of economy. Because there are so many companies that operate within the sector that we are not getting. They are advertising in Ghana. They are selling songs. People are downloading stuff. How are we getting them?
But the last government tried to deal with that. And,
correct.
And wasn't able to really go all out.
Yeah, exactly. But you see, these things are not done in one day. Remember, these businesses were not just came up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
They've been over a decade. So our tax administration should maybe be lag behind, but we need to give them time. We need to invest. We need to make sure that as the economy is shifting to the area, in terms of our tax laws and those things, that will address that. And I think the side aspect is one of the things, if you look at the spirit behind the e-levy, that was one of the conversations. Because you know there is a business going on here in the digital world. You don't have the tools to tax them. So how do we get this? And I think that's one of the things that was used in terms of, okay, if we can, that's what happened. However, in terms of the rolling out, I don't want to. But
are the citizens, I'll let you, but this is baffling or hitting my mind when you're talking about things to correct the tax system. Are the citizens asking for too much, or is GRA not in tune with us? I'm saying that because, one, GRA sets targets that it says it meets all the time.
Correct.
We say we are overtaxed. In fact, the former vice president agreed with that.
Correct.
During the campaign period, that we are overtaxed, and even the ways in which GRA tries to get the tax were not right and should be corrected and all that. Yet over the years, we keep saying that GRA must put in place innovative ways to, get everybody on board to pay taxes. But the people we are crying for are saying they are meeting their targets. They are happy with what they are doing.
Exceeding their targets. They are not just
and exceeding them.
Exactly. I have the data but the question is that on what backdrop? That is the question.
That's what I'm saying. Are we singing the same?
It's also about the target setting,
It's this thing, because if let's assume that there is a pool, there's a section that, as you indicated, is it of privilege? Is what the word is, the unlucky privilege or something?
Yeah, the few.
If you take a step back and look at them, how much of the taxes are also coming from the informal sector? But I see a lot of direct taxes coming from these companies. That's why you see a lot of companies complaining. Companies have. But then the only way, another way to address that is that's when they keep talking about expansion. And that only way comes with their two things: invest more in that area where we are talking about. For instance, the EVAT, the system that came.
Yeah, they should have sustained it.
If you look at the EVAT, it actually, even though there was a pushback, it actually helped
Why was the pushback? What was the role of the political economy?
So there were two things. There were two things. And I think this is one of the sad aspects when we talk about taxation. So let's talk about what is VAT. VAT is a consumption tax. So for instance, you have a business. You are selling a restaurant. When I come in to buy your food, let's say it's 100 cedis, you charge me VAT of say 15%, 12.4, whatever it is. You take it, and it's a tax that I have paid for coming to consume from you.
Yeah.
Now you collect the tax, and the government says that use the tax for, let's say, a month. And then when you finish, bring it back to me.
Bring it back to me.
Data shows that a lot of businesses will collect it and not bring it back. Now, when anybody is trying to help address this, the session is that you are taxing us more, you are taxing business more. But the issue is that the person who took the tax is just taking my tax.
Keeping it for me in track.
Exactly. So it's sometimes about how we understand the whole thing. Let's take an example about the betting tax. If you look at our tax laws, every revenue is taxable unless exempt. If you look at our tax law, betting tax, revenue from betting is not taxed. It's not exempt. The law actually says that the mode of reporting is that pay 10% when you want something. So if you say that, okay, I'm removing the exemption, the 10%, it still doesn't mean that the income is not taxable.
Okay.
Okay. So those are some of the things because when the discussions were ongoing, that's what one of the things that I was asking: are we trying to exempt the revenue that a person will get from betting?
The betting.
Or just the mode of collecting the tax?
Okay.
That discussion needs to be clear.
And whether the tax should be deployed on the betting companies
or the people involved in the betting.
No, but you see, if you look at the betting, who are those betting? As a tax person.
Let's say you and I.
Yes, you and I. How many people fight the taxes at the end of the year?
Okay.
And that's the reason why we always have withholding taxes, because a lot of people don't file their taxes at the end of the year. And the mode of collecting, that's the efficiency, is saying that, okay, you, the person who is paying them, collect a portion and bring it to me. Exactly. So we know when it comes to tax administration, one of the most issues that we talk about is how effective of collecting a tax. If you put the responsibility on the person who has the money, and say that when you are paying this money, person who has earned the revenue, take some and bring it to me, and let him also use the rest. The rest, at the end of the year, if there's a